What's up, race fans? Welcome to episode 4 of GridRival's Fantasy F1 Preview Show. We are coming off the heels of a relatively tame, but certainly controversial USGP where Hamilton and Leclerc were DQ'd for excessive plank wear. All 4 of us were there to see it in person. Planks were added to Formula 1 nearly 30 years ago as a safety precaution due to the deaths of Ayrton Senna and Roland Ratzenberger at the 94 San Marino GP. And since then, they have rarely been the topic of conversation, but given the new floor design introduced last year, they seem to be coming up more and more. Also worth noting, and I'm sure we will discuss today, for the first time in 30 years, an American has scored a point in Formula 1. Albeit as the result of the DQs previously mentioned, it is a point nonetheless. But we are here today to talk about fantasy team strategy for the Mexico GP. Mexico is a course that will favor cars with advantages in straight line speed like Qatar 2 race ago. It is also a fairly flat circuit. The final high speed, long sweeping right hand corner followed by one of the longest straights in Formula 1 resembles that of Monza. There are 3 DRS zones at this course, and the course is located 7,300 feet in altitude over a mile high, which means there is much less aerodynamic drag on the vehicles, allowing them to run higher downforce setups with limited impact on top line speed. All things that you should be considering when you make your picks for this weekend. So what does this all mean for your fantasy league or daily fantasy contest? That is what we are here today to discuss. My name is Ross. I'm the founder and co-founder and CEO of GridRival. With me today is Michael Ursinoli, our CTO, Ryan Booth, business operations director and massive Logan Sargeant fan, and William Laddie, our principal software engineer. So, before we get into fantasy strategy, we cannot start without talking about our boy. Say his name, Ryan.
Logan Sargeant.
Before the USGP, there were mixed opinions on whether or not we would see him again on the grid in 2024. So the question to kick off the show is, do you think the performance that we saw last week at Circuit of the Americas secured him a spot at Williams in 2024? Why not start off with Ryan? I think we all know where his head's at.
I mean, secured his spot. Does a bear use the bathroom in the woods? Like, come on, Williams has to keep him. He is an American hero. It was one of the best tries I think we've ever seen to go from not only from what he qualified 20th or whatever, wherever he was. Who cares? It's how you finish. He almost died in Qatar. Like, he almost died, and he comes back, puts together points. Like, you just can't say enough good about this guy. He is the future of American F1. He is like,
oh man, this has gotten way out of control.
Yeah, I'm gonna be insufferable. I've been insufferable for ever since the DQs came in. So I ordered a hat and multiple shirts, as I said I would, at the track when he scored points. No one else called this. I'm the president of the Logan Sargeant fan club. I knew this was coming. I told everyone last week or 2 weeks ago,
that is true.
Put him in your lineup. He's coming to the home hemisphere. And look what happened. You got him for like $5 million on your team, and now he's... I'll just stop now because I've got plenty more to say, but I do not want to take over the entire podcast.
Well, I think we know how you feel. William, what do you think?
What a nice love letter that was that you wrote him just now, Ryan. Coda was his best drive in months, maybe ever. And he was not last, and it was legitimately not last, which is a big improvement. I think he kept his head on straight the entire time. I'd like to see him get another year. It is just so hard for a rookie to get up to speed in F1 these days, especially with testing basically being non-existent. I'd like to see Williams put their money where their mouth is. We've heard them say all kinds of nice things about him. We'd really like to have him put your money where your mouth is and sign him. What's the holdup? You like him so much, sign him.
Michael, that leaves your opinion left, and I will follow suit.
Yeah, I think he deserves the spot next year, and I just also don't think that there's competition for that spot. There was Lawson did a podcast, and I was interested to see what he said, and he said he's 100% because he's had a standout performance, and I thought maybe there could be a chance of poaching him, but Lawson said he's a Red Bull driver. He's only going to drive for Red Bull. So I think that's the only other person that Williams could have like poached to make a bet on. And I said it when we were at the race, if Logan scored points, he was going to get a contract. And we know James Vels likes him and sees the improvement he wants to see. So I'd like to see him again next year and see what he could do.
Yeah, I probably can't add much to what you guys have said. I tend to agree with William. I think year one of Formula One has proven time and time again to be very difficult. New car, new situation. You're at there's just so much on the line. But we have seen, I think what we've seen is that Logan Sargeant he does have pace, right? He's had many successful qualifyings, but has just had the difficulty stringing a whole event together. But I think the USGP gave us kind of insight to what it could look like when he does. So I would certainly love to see an American back on the grid next year. We'll see if it's him. To kick things off, we are going to update all of you lovely players on our own league, which none of us are leading, but that's okay. In third place amongst the four of us, the leader is still William with 16,727 points and a team value of 132 million. 646 points behind him is yours truly, with $10 million less in team value. And then right on my heels or tail is Mike GP. Only 58 points, 71 points behind, and then 58 points behind him is Logan Sargent's number one fanboy, and maybe that's why you're in last, because you've just taken too many bets on him. I don't know, but Ryan's in fourth. But there's 4 races to go, and so we're here to talk about how to maximize your team for the last 4 races. And one thing I'll say is this is most definitely a time in the season where, for a lot of the season in our league's game, you're thinking a lot about value. I don't want to pretend that that's not the case still, but with only 4 races to go, your team's value just is not going to have a lot of wiggle room up or down as it relates to your strategy. So you also really want to be thinking about points, average points, who's most likely to generate points. So all part of the discussion we're going to have today. Speaking of value, we're going to start by talking about who we think is underpriced. And we're going to debate the top 4 or 5 drivers that belong on that list. I think first up for discussion is somebody who's been on this list for the last 4 or 5 weeks, ever since McLaren brought upgrades and has started to show that they have a very, very fast car, is Oscar Piastri. We've talked about him repeatedly. We've talked about him in every 4 episodes of the show. He is still ranked 9th in salary at $19 million. And coming off of the last weekend's race where he DNF'd, his salary dropped $2 million, which is the most it can drop on GridRival, meaning he might even be more underpriced. So I will throw out Oscar Piastri. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts, and then we can debate and maybe rank these guys. William, why don't you give me a couple other options?
One option I like is Esteban Ocon. The other half of that collision at Coda this past weekend, also dropping $2 million. Mm-hmm. The Alpine's got a reasonable pace. Like, that's a car that can consistently get in the points, maybe even like middle of point territory. So Ocon would be a solid choice, I think, as well as Lewis Hamilton. That disqualification knocking him from the podium to minus $2 million.
Yep.
So there's a discount there, and you'll probably get a lot of mileage for your dollar in terms of points.
Michael or Ryan, anyone you want to add to the list?
I'm going to plug Alonso. He's under 20 million at this point. I know Aston Martin, it's a tough one right now, but could be a solid midfield choice or middle of the road choice in terms of price to potential points if he's able to pull it off.
Yeah, and if you look at Alonso's salary chart, I think everybody who was playing this game at the beginning of the season knows that he was very underpriced out the gate based off of their performance, is now approaching his season start value. So, assuming that that Aston can finish strong, I definitely agree that he's probably at least, if not underpriced, at least teetering on the edge. Ryan, anyone you want to add to the mix?
I'll be targeting Hamilton. I think he is a great value right now after after the DQ, I think that Mercedes has pace. He's looked good recently. And also along those lines, I will be using Mercedes as a constructor probably for the rest of the season. I think they're at a great price point right now. And yeah, they're fighting for the constructor, second place, third place, wherever they're at. So I think they're going to keep looking good. I think they're at a good price point, and Hamilton as well.
Yeah, all well said. So we have 4 drivers to discuss. That we have Piastri, Ocon, Hamilton, and Alonso. The work ahead is ranking these 4. I still think Piastri is number 1 for me. If you compare all of these drivers side by side to their other teammate, which we know in Formula One is the best comparison you can make is the other individual in the same car. Norris is currently ranked 2nd, and Piastri is ranked 9th, and I think it has a lot to do with non-recent events. It has to do with where his salary was still 6-8 races ago. He's still coming up, and he is subject a little bit to some of the rookie stuff we talked about with Logan Sargeant. He is maybe less consistent than Lando's going to be, since he doesn't have quite the experience in a Formula One car. That said, if we're judging this purely off of pace and capability of a vehicle compared to kind of current driver salary rank, for me, he's number 1 amongst the 4 that we talked about. I'm not sure if you guys have any dissenting opinions there, but I think he's top of the list.
I've got a somewhat different list here. I'm going to put Hamilton up top of my my list here, especially as we're down the stretch. We're not trying to grind out dollars at this point. We are trying to maximize our points these last 4 races. So I think Hamilton's your best bang for the buck there. My second choice is actually Ocon. I think Ocon is going to be a little bit better in terms of points per dollar than Piastri. I also think he'll be a little bit more consistent. What happened last week was not his fault. It's one of those racing deals. I also like the fact that Ocon is talent driver eligible. And depending on your situation with talent drivers, that might lean you a little bit more towards Ocon. I would put Piastri 3rd in my order. I do think that his ceiling is pretty high, but his floor is also somewhat low. Especially, we do have a street course down the line a couple races from now in Vegas. If we're thinking about signing somebody the rest of the season, rookies and street courses are a dangerous mix, since there's more walls to run into. The bottom of my list, I don't even have him on my radar. I was surprised to hear Alonso. I actually have him on a different list that we're going to talk about later.
Sounds good. Ryan, why don't you give us your insights?
I've got Ocon at the top of the list, and like William said, it's solely because he is talent driver eligible. You double those points up, I think he's great value. Then I will say Hamilton, because that was my choice, and I love my choices. Followed by Piastri, and then, I don't know what Mike's thinking with Alonso. I'm really glad that I'm trying to chase him down in the league if Alonso is going to be on his team for the next couple weeks. Makes me feel very good about things. And it is worth noting, I know we talked about how I'm currently in 4th. It is worth noting that I had the most points for the Austin Grand Prix.
Yes,
so
it is.
I did want to bring that up to save a little bit of face.
And how did we all dodge the disqualifications? None of us had Hamilton. None of us had Leclerc.
I am not on the top 3. Now, just looking at the race report, Ryan, you are in fact first with 1,004 points. And then in second, we have William. In third, we have Mike GP. And I'm nowhere to be found. So if you're listening, you know which guys to listen to.
And condolences on your season if you did have both Leclerc and Hamilton. You probably just had your whole season blown up by those scrutineers.
That would be another gentleman and GridRival team member, Harry, who had both of those people on his team and took, actually, before the DQ was noted, he had taken over first place, and then he got bumped back to second, but his team lost $3 million in value, so rough weekend for him, and he dropped his points differential was almost 300 points that he lost as a result of those DQs. Michael, you're last. It sounds like your work here is mostly to defend Alonso. After you, of course, rank Ocon, Hamilton, and Piastri.
Yeah. So I put Piastri at the top. I think you can't get a better points potential to contract value right now. Of course, he could DNF, but if he performs big. I like Ocon, but I like Ocon for a different reason. Gasly is right. If Gasly has one more good race, he's no longer talent driver eligible. So if you sign Gasly and don't remember and are planning to talent driver him, you should switch to Ocon and sign Ocon because he has more contract value if he performs well on the talent driver side, where this might be the last race that Gasly is talent driver eligible. And then, Alonso, I'm going to defend it for a second. At this stage of the season, you also need to pick some wild cards that, if they work out, go in your favor. Like Leclerc, Austin's a perfect case. Leclerc and Hamilton were safe choices, and look what happened, right? So a little bit of a wild card choice with Alonso, but he's down $2 million. 19.8 million on the contract, and I think the points potential is still there. And if he has a good race and something else happens, then that's a differentiator in your lineup that could put you ahead of other folks. And I'm in that situation. I'm trying to overtake Ross, so I'm willing to gamble. I'm not winning the league. My goal is just to beat Ross.
Yeah, and you do bring up a good point. There's a statistic you can find if you tap the top right graph icon in your league, it'll open your driver panel where you can see a stat called league adoption, which probably has the most importance at this point in the season, right? With 3 or 4 races left, Michael raises a good point, which is, in fantasy racing, unlike with fantasy football or sports where you have thousands of players, we're all picking from the same roster, right? So we have to differentiate somehow, and this is the time to consider that strategy. So I put Piastri first as well. I think I am very also bullish on Ocon based off of the feedback you guys have had. I think that he makes a lot of logical sense. I put Hamilton third, and then I'm more kind of on the fence with Alonso. I kind of understand everybody's points of view, but I'm not sure if I'd roster him. I think another thing worth discussing is just contract length, right? We have 4 races left, so that's the max you can do. Are you guys signing anybody on shorter terms than that? Or if you're picking of somebody, are you sticking with them for the remainder of the season at this point?
I'll go first. At 5 races left, I signed a number of drivers for 5 races, Norris, Piastri, and Verstappen. So I'm going to be ending my season with those 3 drivers. So I only have the 2 other drivers that I'm swapping out, plus my constructor. So I am riding those 3 to the end of the season, but I'm leaving myself flexibility for the last few races to try and catch those opportunities. So I am doing 1 or 2 race contracts for the other spots that I have, just to try and take any advantage I can to get those extra 100 points that I need.
Yeah, so I'm in a similar boat. I have four positions rostered that are going to be locked until the end of the season. I left 2 open to give myself some options here and there. William, what about you?
So right now, I don't have anybody for the rest of the season just because of the way the expirations shook out. I do strongly think I'll be picking up Max for the duration this week, probably. Mm-hmm. I think most of my signings the rest of the way are going to be for the rest of the season, or they're a placeholder for the guy who's on cooldown that week. I'll have both McLaren drivers on cooldown before the end of the season at some point. I'll have Red Bull on cooldown at some point, so I may have a one-off filler for the odd week. But otherwise, I'm pretty much going to be locking in the rest of the way.
Cool. Ryan?
Yep, for the rest of the way, I'll have Piastri, Hamilton, and Mercedes. Logan Sargeant's a tough one to kind of talk about. As the president of the fan club, I'm contractually obligated not to say anything that might be construed as negative. So I would say maybe only stick with him in this hemisphere. Maybe Vegas is not going to be his best race. We'll see what happens with Logan Sargeant, but I do think that we'll always have Austin. we'll always have Austin.
That's right. We'll never forget it. All right. So that should give y'all a sense for some folks that you should have on your team to gain a strategic advantage against your league mates. Now we're going to talk about people you don't want to have on your team. So what are some picks currently based off price, value, points, some of the things that we're seeing on the track that you should avoid on your team? William, let's start with you.
My number one avoid is Fernando Alonso.
There we go.
May surprise you, may surprise some of you listening to this. I think Aston Martin doesn't really know where they're at with the car. Like, they were openly talking about using Coda as a test session, and they had Stroll on the old setup, and Stroll had Alonso beat, I think. I think that they just lost the way with the upgrades, and they're somewhat unpredictable, and honestly, I can name at least 4 teams that are faster than them at this point. Red Bull, McLaren, Mercedes, Ferrari, all faster than Alonso, who's 8th in salary right now. And on a given week, he usually gets beat by at least one Alpine. He's mixing it up with Albon, so I think he's overpriced, and he's not even talent eligible at this point. So Alonso's my biggest avoid. And apart from him, I obviously Stroll for some of the same reasons. Also, he's Lance Stroll.
Yeah, he certainly
which is always a reason. And then, speaking of upgrades gone wrong, Haas is another avoid. Like, they seem to have gone backwards this year. They got beaten by Sargeant, and like in some of my other leagues and little contests we ran amongst ourselves last week, Haas bit me, and I won't make that mistake again. And I would put out one other PSA. Keep an eye out for talk about power unit penalties as we get down the line this season. There's already chatter about who might take one in Mexico. And if you know you're looking at a grid drop or a pit lane start, that's going to limit your upside on race day.
Michael, do you want to defend Fernando Alonso at all?
I don't want to defend Alonso at all, but like Ross said, look at the league adoptions and look at where, if there's an outperformance, you could stand ahead. And right now, with the distaste for Alonso in the GridRival Employee League, that is an area where, if you have about $20 million to deploy, could work in your favor or could bite you in the end. So we'll see. But on my worst pick of the week, or worst pick for next week, I have 2, but one I think is guaranteed, which is Logan Sargeant. That performance is not going to be repeated. The improvement points aren't going to be there. I don't think it's a smart move to sign him now. I could see myself though signing him after this race. So let him take the salary and points hit next race, and then consider him. My other one is unfortunately Daniel Ricciardo. Big fan, but I just don't. For the very similar, for actually a cheaper price due to Lawson's performance, I would take Yuki right now for the price to points value. So just don't know where he's at with. He didn't have a lot of time in the car. Don't know where he's at with his hand. I'm going to stay away for now and watch how he performs, and I'll be glad to be wrong there. But I think the safer bet is Yuki.
Ryan,
I will be fading Ferrari. Both Ferrari drivers, Ferrari as a constructor. I do not believe in them. I mean, they seem to be a mess. You got Leclerc out there cheating with ineligible cars, getting DQ'd. They don't know what they're doing. I rewatched the race, listened to some of the radio. They're doing their plan C, D, E, all the plans are plan L. They're big losers. I'm out on Ferrari. And just to address some of the Logan Sargeant slander from Mike, I guess if you're not going to use him in Mexico, it makes sense. He doesn't tend to do well in some of those, Qatar, Mexico has high elevation, all these weird things out of his control that might affect him, so I can understand. Plus, value not being the biggest thing now heading into the end of the league. You don't need cheap salaries, so that's the spin zone I'm sticking to there.
If I'm ranking the races where I would run Sargeant, probably the one I would most run him at would be Abu Dhabi, the very end of the season. And then probably Mexico would be my second choice. It is a low downforce track, but I think it's still better than, say, Brazil, which is a somewhat tighter track and can get a little bit moist sometimes. And then Vegas, the worst choice, just because there's so many walls on a street course. Since we're discussing Sargeant and where we might run him.
So I got to defend Ferrari and Mercedes here for these DQs. I think there's been a lot of the word cheating thrown out. But, if you do your research on this floor thing, there is a lot of complexity with the undersides of these vehicles these days and the Venturi tunnel that they brought back. And ride height is it's a hard thing to get right for some of these cars for a lot of different reasons. And then you throw in a race that only had one practice session for the teams to be able to adjust the ride height properly. And then you throw in a track that is increasingly bumpy. I think we were all at Austin last week. We saw that course was built in the middle of a clay field that's perpetually getting worse every year with bumps. And so I think those two things combined, the teams just didn't have enough time to get their setup right. So I really don't think it was anything intentional. I think it was intentional. You'd see both cars on both teams having some issues. But yeah, it's the floorboard thing is quite complex, and the tolerances that we're talking about are very, very minimal. Yes, go ahead, William.
It could be that both of the other cars were actually illegal, but they weren't.
They
checked.
weren't tested. You are correct. That's right.
That was the big controversy. Actually, there were only 4 cars that had their flanks checked. So when they go through scrutineering after the race, they don't check every aspect of every car, and there's been a lot of chatter about that. I think they did get too aggressive with the setups, and I think that's actually why they were so much closer to Red Bull, and one of the reasons they kept up with Verstappen in qualifying, because, well, they were illegally low. Red Bull may have gone a bit more conservative. Yeah. I do think Max's car was one of the ones that was checked and was legal.
It was.
So,
you are correct.
I think that it was a little bit of a false pace just for that reason, and yes, one practice session does not yield you enough data.
I agree, and I think, look, there's nothing that I could think would be more stressful than trying to manage these teams to the rules that have now been created that govern this sport. It's just it seems like just more and more insane, and I get it, things have to be fair, but some of the rules and restrictions, it's a lot they have to take care of. And yeah, you're right, the fact that only 4 cars were measured is debatably unfair to a lot of the other teams. So it will certainly be a controversial topic for many races to come. That leaves me. I go last here. My no pick. I can't say much that you guys have already said. I will throw out Nico Hülkenberg from Haas in this mix, only because one of the things that happened at this last event with 2 top drivers DQing is the rest of the field jumped up 2 spots that you could argue maybe were not a realistic representation of the performances we would have otherwise seen. And so Nico Hülkenberg, I luckily signed him for one race. That race was the USGP. He went up $1.8 million, which puts him now at about 10.6, and I just don't think we're going to see him continue to end at that price point. So I think he would be a risk for me. Otherwise, I agree with everything that you guys have said. So that leaves us to close out the podcast with talking about talent drivers. I think there's an obvious choice. You always want to maximize your points, and the obvious choice is usually picking the person who's achieved the most and is closest to that barrier. But there was a good point brought up earlier, which is Gasly's $17.9 million. If you think that he's going to go above that, I think he's pretty capped out. But it is a risk if you sign him and he goes above that threshold that you're going to have to pick somebody else. So talk about what you think are good talent options. I know Ocon was thrown out as well by William, but any other suggestions that you guys have for our users? Mike, go ahead.
I would say the top 3 picks are going to be the ones who are closest to the market cap for the talent driver limit of 18 million. So it's Gasly, Albon, and Ocon for that kind of consistent performance. Where could I spend money and kind of know that my talent driver points should do well. I'm running Gasly. He's expiring off. He's my last race with him, so I feel like historically this season drivers who have gotten close to the 18 million have exceeded the 18 million. So I'm just going to go with that intuition and run Gasly for talent driver for this race. But then I'll probably be running Ocon after that.
William.
So my number one choice is Ocon. I would say that on pace, he and Gasly are about similar, and Ocon's cheaper, and he could potentially stay talent driver. I think there's also a little bit more room for improvement points with Ocon since he's averaged a bit lower. So I like Ocon best, and then my next choice would be Albon among the more expensive drivers. Gasly hasn't really been on my radar so much, but if you've got him and he's your choice, I could get behind running him. I would not sign him, though, for the purposes of using him as a talent driver. If you're on a bit of a budget constraint, I like Tsunoda as the next choice, and then Sargeant, actually, for Mexico is probably the next best choice. I think he has more upside than Haas. His floor is quite low. His floor is last place, but
Yeah.
I think he can beat Haas.
Yeah, interesting. Ryan, close us out.
Yep, I think nothing that hasn't already been said, but it's Ocon for me. So instead of talking about talent driver, I'll just say it's kind of sad that we didn't mention Checo at all going to his home GP, and I hope he has a good race.
I hope so as well. Well, that gets us to the end of our discussion today for the Mexico GP. We hope that you all enjoy the race. We hope that everything we've debated helps you build a more efficient team this weekend, and we will see you guys all in 1 week to discuss Brazil. Have a great weekend.